Hello everyone, welcome to Earth Archives. In many people's minds, Newton is almost synonymous with the classic image of a long-haired scientist who was struck on the head by an apple and suddenly discovered gravity. But what is the truth behind this? Is the story of Newton and the apple just a myth? Did the apple really hit Newton on the head and gravity was instantly discovered? Or, to put it another way, what scientific conflicts and struggles were happening behind the physical law that we are so familiar with today? Today, we are going to talk about Newton and his lifelong rival, Robert Hooke, a story filled with competition and resentment. This seemingly distant historical event actually provides us with profound insights into the difficult journey that scientists face. Newton's early beginnings, the rise of a genius. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientists in history, made an indelible contribution to the development of modern physics. His name is inseparable from the laws of gravity and the three laws of motion. However, behind all of these achievements, Newton's beginnings were a process full of exploration and curiosity. Newton's early life was not easy. He was born on January 4, 1643, in Lincolnshire, England. His father passed away before he was born, which led him to be raised by his mother. Although Newton's family was not wealthy, he demonstrated extraordinary intelligence and a thirst for knowledge from a young age. As a boy, he had a strong interest in learning, especially in mathematics and natural phenomena. He often devoted his time to experiments and observations, and this curiosity ultimately led him to Cambridge University, where he began his deep exploration of science. At Cambridge, Newton encountered great teachers who inspired his thinking and studied the most advanced scientific knowledge of the time. However, Newton's genius did not rely solely on his teachers' instruction. Much of it came from his independent thinking and experimentation. His pursuit of science was a pure form of exploration, and this spirit of inquiry led him to become a leader in many areas. Newton's research wasn't limited to mathematics or physics. He also made profound studies in optics and proposed the particle theory of light. This discovery had a profound impact on later scientific developments. Newton's most famous achievement is his work on gravity. According to Newton's theory, gravity is the force of attraction between all objects in the universe, a theory that overturned long-held understandings of celestial motion. The legendary story of how Newton's theory of gravity was inspired by an apple falling from a tree is romanticized, but undeniably, Newton's intuition and deep understanding of the laws of nature made this discovery one of the greatest breakthroughs in the history of science. In 1666, Newton was just an obscure scholar at Cambridge. However, it was in this year that Newton made his groundbreaking discoveries. With astonishing speed and profound insight, he launched his academic legacy. Not only did he redefine mechanics, but he also designed an advanced reflecting telescope. More importantly, he proposed a theoretical framework for the universe. All of these achievements not only made him stand out in academia, but also earned him a place as a Fellow of the Royal Society, a prestigious honor that marked Newton as one of the leaders of the British scientific community. However, Newton did not rest on his laurels. His academic journey was far from smooth, and a series of events would soon present him with a formidable challenge from another scientist, whose name was Robert Hooke. Newton and Hooke's optical battle, the struggle of science. The optical dispute between Isaac Newton and Robert Hooke is one of the most tense and intellectually charged debates in the history of science. This argument not only led to fierce discussions about the nature of light, but also revealed the intense competition within the scientific community and the relentless pursuit of truth at the time. Newton, the renowned physicist and mathematician, made undeniable contributions to optics, particularly with his theory of light's particle nature, which had a profound influence on future scientific developments. However, in this process, the conflict between Newton and Hooke became one of the most dramatic episodes in scientific history. Hooke, a contemporary of Newton and also a member of the Royal Society, made significant contributions to the field of optics. Hooke argued that light was a wave, a theory that stood in stark contrast to Newton's particle theory of light. Hooke's wave theory was based on his observations of phenomena such as the refraction and reflection of light, and he proposed that the wave-like nature of light could explain certain phenomena that Newton's theory could not. The differing views of these two scientists led to a heated debate that lasted for years. The crux of this dispute lay in the fundamentally different understandings of light. Newton believed that light was made up of small particles that traveled at extremely high speeds and could refract and reflect differently depending on the medium. This viewpoint was extensively elaborated in Newton's optics and served as a guiding work for optical research at the time. In contrast, Hooke argued that light was a wave, claiming that the wave-like nature of light could better explain the phenomena of refraction, and he presented many experiments to support his theory. As time passed, the scientific battle escalated, especially after Newton published Optics. Hooke strongly criticized the work, arguing that Newton's theory was overly one-sided and did not give enough importance to the wave nature of light. Hooke's criticisms deepened the rift between the two, and Newton's responses became increasingly sharp. In fact, Newton was highly sensitive to Hooke's critiques and felt that Hooke had not shown enough respect for his work. This made their relationship increasingly strained. Newton was not one to easily back down, and he even wrote in a letter, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." This phrase is considered a challenge to Hooke, implying that Newton believed Hooke's optical research was not original, but rather borrowed from previous work. This remark only intensified the conflict between them. As the battle escalated, Newton became increasingly uneasy. Under Hooke's continued criticism, Newton even threatened to leave the Royal Society. Although he ultimately stayed after some mediation, this academic conflict profoundly affected him and even led him to develop a fear of further optical research. Newton and Hooke's mechanical controversy. Science or personal vendetta? The conflict between Newton and Hooke gradually escalated into an open academic battle. Hooke accused Newton of failing to acknowledge Hooke's contributions to mechanics in his works, and he strongly challenged Newton's theories in public. Newton responded to Hooke's accusations and increasingly grew resentful of Hooke's personal attacks. This debate did not end there. Rather, Hooke's accusations left Newton with lasting psychological turmoil. Newton's responses became more intense, even deliberately ignoring certain aspects of Hooke's views. This not only deepened the hostility between them, but also made the dispute a hot topic in the scientific community. However, was this debate purely academic, or was it driven by personal animosity? In fact, the relationship between Newton and Hooke had never been smooth. Hooke was straightforward and liked to challenge authority, while Newton was highly confident and somewhat reclusive. Hooke had publicly criticized Newton's theories and emphasized that his own research on mechanics and universal gravitation had preceded Newton's, which posed a significant challenge and threat to Newton. Newton, on the other hand, thought Hooke's theories were superficial and undermined his own accomplishments. As a result, their opposition escalated from an academic disagreement to a personal conflict. The eventual outcome of this dispute was that Newton solidified his unshakable position in the history of physics, while Hooke failed to receive the recognition he deserved. However, later reflections on this controversy in the scientific community made people realize that scientific progress depends not only on the correctness of theories, but also on the social dynamics and interpersonal relationships of the time. Newton's turning point: the discovery of universal gravitation. The decades-long feud between the two great scientists gradually worsened, and one of the most controversial moments was the process in which Newton discovered the theory of universal gravitation. Hooke had proposed the theory of elasticity well before Newton and had some preliminary insights into gravity. He believed that all objects were influenced by a restoring force that caused them to attract each other. However, his theory could not explain how objects attracted each other precisely, and more importantly, Hooke failed to concretize the theory of gravity, which led to a divergence in the paths of the two scientists. In Newton's world, the motion and laws of things always had a profound mathematical basis. Inspired by Copernicus's heliocentric theory, Newton began to think about how the Earth could hold objects in place in a fixed manner and how planets orbit the Sun. Thus, Newton proposed the theory of universal gravitation, systematically explaining the theory for the first time in Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687, where he stated that every object exerts a gravitational pull on other objects, and this force is directly proportional to their mass and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. However, this groundbreaking discovery did not immediately bring peace. Hooke expressed doubts about Newton's theory, claiming that he had proposed similar ideas long before Newton. In fact, Hooke had suggested a model of gravity as early as 1679, and he was confident that he was the true pioneer of the theory of universal gravitation. Yet, Newton did not immediately give Hooke sufficient credit for his contributions, which led to a public dispute between the two. Hooke became angry and repeatedly demanded that Newton acknowledge his contributions, but Newton chose to ignore these demands. In the end, this dispute became a classic example in the history of science. Although Newton's theory of universal gravitation was ultimately recognized as more complete and predictive, Hooke's early intuitive and observational contributions to gravity cannot be overlooked. The conflict between Newton and Hooke did not diminish Newton's major contributions to science, but it also serves as a reminder that the development of science is not always smooth, and behind it may lie competition and conflict, as well as contributions that have not been fully acknowledged. Newton and the apple. Is it true or fiction? The story of Newton and the apple, this classic scientific legend, has not only become a symbol of physics, but also a quintessential example of a genius discovery in popular discussion. Many have heard the tale, Newton sitting under an apple tree, suddenly seeing an apple fall, which sparks his thinking about universal gravitation. But how much of this story is true? Or is it just a legend created by later generations to add dramatic flair? The origin of this story comes from Newton's biographer, William Stukeley, who published the life and letters of Isaac Newton in the early 18th century. In the book, Stukeley recounts a conversation with Newton, in which he describes how Newton remembered an event from his youth. He recalled walking one day, seeing an apple fall from a tree, and suddenly wondering why objects always fall to the ground. He speculated that the Earth must have some sort of attracting force that causes objects to move toward the center of the Earth, which eventually led to his development of the theory of universal gravitation. This description does not mention the dramatic moment of sudden realization under the apple tree, but instead describes a gradual process of thought development. So, is the apple story true or not? The key lies in how the story has been passed down. While Newton himself did not emphasize the apple's role in his discovery of gravity in later recollections, the apple, as a symbolic image, deeply captivated later literature and culture. Perhaps this is human nature's love for simple and symbolic stories. The falling apple became a concrete expression of the abstract concept of universal gravitation in physics. It made the profound scientific principle more accessible and linked Newton's discovery to everyday observations. Moreover, the story of the apple also carries a romantic element, painting the image of a scientist making a great discovery through a simple phenomenon. This is not just a scientific journey, but also carries some philosophical significance, symbolizing the power of thinking and the keen observation of the world. Newton's true inspiration came from his deep insights into the details of nature and his constant contemplation, and whether the apple truly fell or not does not diminish his passion and focus as a scientist in the pursuit of truth. In conclusion, the story of Newton and the apple may not be as dramatic as the legend suggests, but it undoubtedly became an important symbol in sparking public interest in scientific exploration. Hooke's later years, a scientist not fully understood. Robert Hooke, the 17th century English scientist, had a profound impact on the history of science, yet his later years were filled with neglect and unacknowledged achievements. Many people's understanding of Hooke tends to focus on his disputes with Newton, especially the debate over the theory of universal gravitation. However, Hooke's scientific accomplishments go far beyond that. Not only was he a pioneer of the microscope, but he also made outstanding contributions to the theories of elasticity, astronomy, and optics, although these significant achievements are often forgotten by history. Within the Royal Society, Hooke quickly rose to prominence, becoming one of its key members. His scientific research spanned a wide range of fields, including biology, physics, astronomy, and even meteorology. His work Micrographia, which recorded his observations of various microscopic organisms, also introduced the concept of the cell for the first time, an insight that would have an immeasurable impact on the later development of biology. However, Hooke's later years were not as glorious as he had hoped. Despite his rich body of work, he had fierce disputes with many of his contemporaries, particularly with Newton. The most famous of these was the argument over the theory of universal gravitation. Long before Newton, Hooke had proposed theories related to gravity, suggesting that the motion of planets might be influenced by some kind of elastic force. However, after Newton published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, he did not adequately acknowledge Hooke's contributions, which deeply frustrated Hooke and led to a gradual deterioration of their relationship. In science, Hooke's achievements were often overshadowed by Newton's brilliance, which was undoubtedly a tragedy for him. Even though Hooke had proposed the groundbreaking law of elasticity and made several important discoveries in astronomy, his historical reputation never matched the true extent of his contributions. Worse still, Hooke spent his later years in relative loneliness and poverty. Without the fame and fortune that Newton enjoyed, his work was not fully recognized, and many future generations failed to give proper credit to his contributions. When Hooke passed away in 1703, the focus of the scientific community had already shifted to figures like Newton and other masters, and Hooke's name gradually faded from public memory. Despite this, looking back today at Hooke's scientific achievements, we can still see his exceptional contributions to physics, astronomy, microscopy, and many other fields. His theories and discoveries played a crucial role in driving the progress of later scientific developments. Newton's legend and Hooke's contribution. Newton's legend is already etched in the history of science as an indelible and glorious moment. However, behind this awe-inspiring story lies an underappreciated contribution, that of Robert Hooke. Although the process by which Newton discovered the theory of universal gravitation is often depicted as a flash of genius, the truth is that this theory's development was not solely the work of Newton, but a collective effort of many unrecognized contributors, with Hooke being one of them. Hooke's name is often mentioned alongside Newton's, but his place in history is far less prominent than Newton's. In fact, Hooke left deep marks in many scientific fields, including the theory of elasticity, microscopy, and astronomy, playing a pivotal role in the development of modern science. Yet, his contributions are often overlooked, especially regarding the theory of universal gravitation. As early as 1666, Hooke had a strong interest in the gravitational attraction between celestial bodies, and he proposed a concept in which planetary motion is influenced by some force that could be described mathematically. This idea closely resembled the theory later proposed by Newton. However, when Newton published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, he did not fully acknowledge Hooke's pioneering role in this field, which led to the gradual deterioration of their relationship. Newton's theory of universal gravitation is undoubtedly one of his greatest discoveries. It not only transformed our understanding of celestial motion, but also laid the groundwork for later physics. However, the formation of this theory was not instant. It was the result of prolonged thought and accumulation of knowledge. During this process, Hooke's contributions were undeniably significant. Hooke's theory of elastic force, while not fully explaining universal gravitation, provided Newton with valuable insights. Hooke not only proposed early theories on gravity, but also discovered the laws governing planetary motion and made substantial contributions to the study of optical phenomena. Despite this, Hooke's name has often been neglected by later generations, likely due to the public disputes between him and Newton. Newton failed to sufficiently acknowledge Hooke's contributions, which made it difficult for Hooke to receive the recognition he deserved in the history of science. Although Newton's legendary story is astounding, it also obscures the selfless contributions of many other scientists. When we reflect on this history, we must recognize that Hooke's contributions to the development of the theory of universal gravitation were indispensable, and that he should occupy a more prominent place in the annals of science. Thank you all for watching. What are your thoughts on Newton's lifelong rival? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.